Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections along with the daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the booming private sector in the space domain, the challenges hindering its potential, and the way forward. Then in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the rising menace of antimicrobial resistance and the ways to deal with it. Then in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026 along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to unleashing India's private space revolution. In the last 4 to 5 years, what we have been observing is the increasing participation of the private players in the very strategic space domain. And the reasons have been primarily 2. The very first reason is to utilize the talent with respect to the private sector in the space domain. The second reason is to make sure that ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, focuses upon more important research areas in the space domain. These are primarily the 2 reasons. It is in that line that the government has come up with various policy initiatives with respect to the integration of the private sector in the space domain. It is in that line that we also had the institutionalization of the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, INSPACE, in the year 2020. So that this particular body, the INSPACE, acts as the authorizer for the integration of the private sector in the space domain. Also, you must remember that we had the Indian Space Policy of 2023, which very explicitly says or gives impetus to this point of integration of non-governmental entities, the private sector in the end-to-end space activities. For example, in terms of building and operating the satellites, or various services such as remote sensing or satellite communication. So what we see is that definitely the government is coming up with various impetus or various measures so as to increase the participation of the private sector in the space domain. It is also in this particular article mentioned that we have a particular consortium of 4 space startups led by Pixel Space who have won a bid to basically build and own and operate a particular Earth observation satellite constellation. So this is again a very important news, indigenous and private satellite constellation. So again, a very important news. So what we'll see today is, we'll see what is the overall status of the space economy in the country with respect to the private sector also. What is the importance of integration of private sector in the space domain? What are the challenges being confronted? See, definitely the private sector is booming in the space domain, but there are some serious challenges also, right? And what should be the way forward? Believe me, it's going to be a very comprehensive discussion like always. And then we'll also look at a particular mains practice question with respect to this particular topic. Now, this is with respect to GS3, space, technology and indigenization. Now, let's first talk about this particular concept of space economy. What do we mean by space economy? As per the definition given by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, what it says verbatim is that space economy refers to the full range of activities and the use of resources that create value and benefits human beings in the course of exploring, researching, understanding, managing and utilizing the space. This is the kind of definition which OECD has given with respect to space economy. Now, when we look at India's space economy, the total valuation, you will find it that as of 2023, the valuation stands at almost US dollars $8.4 billion, right? Now, this amounts to almost 2% of the global share. So it's a very small share, right? Now, the aim of the government is to increase this particular 8.4 billion US dollars to almost 44 billion US dollars by the year 2033. And this would be including almost 11 billion US dollars of exports, right? And then it would become, the total share would increase from 2% to that of 7 to 8% of the global share by 2033, right? Now, the overall space sector in India can be categorized into various subsectors. For example, we have the satellite manufacturing, then we have the launch services, then we have the satellite services, and then we have the ground segment. Now, if you look at these individual subsectors, the very first, satellite manufacturing, ISRO has been pioneering in this particular aspect. But recently what we have seen is that there has been technology disruption. And we have had private sectors coming up with various small satellites, right? And therefore, private sector becomes important in this particular domain. The valuation, the market size in 2020 was 2.1 billion US dollars. It is estimated that this would increase to almost 3.2 US billion dollars by the end of 2025. Next, we have the launch services. Now, what you must understand is in this particular subsector, the Indian Space Research Organization has a mastery. And from the year 2014 till the year 2019, ISRO earned a forex of almost 170 million US dollars. Million US dollars, right? So this is again a very important achievement because it basically carried or ferried the satellites of the foreign countries into the space, right? So the market size in 2020, and then you can see also the valuation for 2025. Then we have the satellite services. Now these can be of different types. For example, we have the remote sensing services, right? Or we have the PVT services. What is PVT services? Position, velocity and timing. You must be aware of the GPS, Global Positioning System. So this is a kind of PVT services. So different services are offered by these satellites also. Market size 2020 was of 3.8 billion US dollars. It is then expected to increase to almost 4.6 US billion dollars. Then we have the ground segment. What do we mean by ground segment? Let's say we have a particular ground station A, right? And then we have the another ground station B. And now we have a particular satellite over here. Now, A is sending signals to satellite, and then this particular satellite is then sending the signals back to A. Now, we have this particular ground component of A and B. This is what the ground segment of the overall component is all about, right? So the market size in 2020 was almost 3.1 billion US dollars, and it is expected to increase to almost $4 billion by the end of this particular year. This is the overall scenario. You need not to memorize these things, but yes, do remember the various subsectors. Now talking about the India space startups. As I told you in the beginning, that we have been witnessing booming integration of the private sector in the overall space domain. In the years of 2014-15, we had a mere 6 to 7 number of private startups in the space domain. And now the number has increased to almost 150. There has been a remarkable growth in the numbers of these startups. And primarily it is because of the facilitation by the government, right? And see, one thing which you must understand is that these private sector players, they are not focusing upon few specific sectors. That is, they're having a diversified approach. They are working in different verticals, different segments in the overall space domain. For example, satellite technology, making sure that the kind of satellites we have, they're more efficient, they're more cost effective. Then we have launch services. You must be aware of a particular company, which is Skyroot. It basically launched a particular private space rocket, Vikram S, in the year 2022. Then we have satellite communication. We have companies like Geo. We have companies like OneWeb coming in this particular domain. Then we have Earth observation. In this particular article, we have the Pixel Space coming up with a particular satellite constellation with respect to Earth observation. So what we see is that they are having a diversified outlook. Now, one of the most important factors for the integration of the private sector has been the INSPACE, Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. As I told you, it acts as the authorizer for the integration of the private sector. Now, see, this particular INSPACE, it basically conceptualized the aspect of venture capitals for these private sectors. And that was the reason that in November last year, we had the government coming up with the venture capital of almost 1,000 crores for these startups. In addition to the venture capital, there has also been almost a 500 crore technology adoption fund for these startups. Now, see, why do these companies, why do these non-governmental entities need venture capital? That's the question. See, what you must understand is that the kind of activities which these private players are doing in the space domain, it's quite risky, right? It might bear fruits or not, the kind of research they are doing. And it is also very cost intensive. It requires a lot of money, right? But it is risky. Therefore, the traditional lenders, for example, the banks or the financial institutions, they are not really inclined to basically lend some money to these private sector enterprises. And it is for this particular reason that we have the concept of venture capital for these private sector enterprises. And INSPACE basically conceptualized this idea of venture capital for these private sector startups. Now, we have 1,000 crore venture capital fund, and this gives financial support to these startups similar to what the other countries are doing. You must understand that we also have the other countries focusing upon the incorporation of the private sector in the space. For example, we have the United Kingdom, or we have Japan, we have even Saudi Arabia, because the space domain is strategically important. Let's take the case of SpaceX, right? Now, we have NASA using the launch vehicles of SpaceX. Why? Because the kind of products and services, the kinds of product and services which SpaceX has come up with, they are quite efficient. They're quite cost effective in nature. For example, let's take the case of reusable launch vehicle. What does it show? It shows that the private sector integration is very important, as I told you, because they come up with different innovations which are quite cost effective in nature. Look at this particular infographic. You'll see, and this information has been given by Ernst & Young, EY. It says that the investment in the Indian space startups has increased to almost 108.52 million US dollars in the year 2022, and for the years of 2024 and 25, the numbers are much higher. Just look at this number of new space startup in India. It has almost crossed 150 by the year of 2025. Now, see, we primarily have two domains in the space aspect. The first is the upstream and second is the downstream. What do we mean by upstream? See, when we are talking about the development and deployment of satellites, what we call as the space assets, this is the upstream services. Then we have the downstream, that is utilizing or applying the data collected by these satellites. For example, the Earth observation or satellite communication. So these are the upstream and downstream. We have different companies. For example, the Skyroot in the upstream aspect. We have Dhruva Space. We have the Agnikul, right? And then we have downstream. For example, we have Pixel, as we are talking about this particular company in this article. Then we have Vasundhara and different other space enterprises. And these have been the key achievements. You can just have a look with respect to these space startups. Now, what is the importance of space startups in India? Why they're really important to integrate in the overall space domain? The very first is innovation in space technology. See, let's take the case of ISRO or any other government entity. It has sufficient funds with it. It can focus upon different research areas. But these private startups, they usually come up, they're set up in a single room. The starting is a single room. They are resource crunch. They do not have that much of resources. So they focus upon this aspect of frugal innovation. And therefore, what ultimately happens is that they come up with the cost-effective and scalable technologies. As I told you, in satellite technologies, many of the ideas of these private sectors have been incorporated by even NASA. As I told you, NASA is using the SpaceX platforms, or ISRO is using some of the platforms manufactured by the private entities in the country. So that is because they are providing cost-effective yet effective solutions, right? Then we have the small satellite launch vehicles. The idea of the small satellite launch vehicles was primarily a private one. So the private sector enterprises came up with this particular idea, right? Then we have economic growth. As I told you, that the market in India is expected to cross almost 44 billion US dollars by the year 2033. And see, it is not just restricted to the space. The kind of positive externalities or the positive spillover effects we will witness with respect to the booming private sector in the space domain would have its effect on different sectors. For example, take the case of precision agriculture, right? The farmers would have the proper information with respect to the weather. They would have the information with respect to when they should sow their crops. Or let's talk about the defense, or let's talk about the mining activities. With respect to these satellites, we can have a proper data with respect to the exploration, which are the more prospective sites for mining a particular mineral, right? So these are some of the positive externalities. GDP growth, it would contribute significantly because it would give an impetus to different sectors, right? Diversify the economy, right? Then we have the job creation. It is not just, we're not just talking about the highly skilled scientists in the space domain. It would also offer jobs to different players. For example, in different domains, in engineering, data analysis, software development, right? So that is a kind of indirect employment which it would make to happen. Then we have the strategic national importance. As I told you, space domain is an area which has a dual use aspect, both the civil as well as military. So having a robust space domain, definitely it enhances the national security architecture of any country. Therefore, this is very important, be it the national defense, because it would increase the intelligence and surveillance capacity of a particular state, right? Or let's say disaster management. Recently, we had a NISAR, right? So this would definitely give us the information with respect to the disasters which may happen. And then proactively, we can take the steps in order to mitigate those disasters. Then satellite systems, advanced satellite systems, so as to make them more efficient. Next is the global competitiveness. See, what you must understand is that still there are very few countries in the world who have mastery or expertise with respect to the space domain. Take the case of United States or China or Russia or few countries in European Union. Now this itself makes the space domain quite strategic in nature. And this was very well manifested in the movie Swades, which basically gave us the imagination with respect to the working of NASA in the US. Shah Rukh Khan played as a scientist in NASA. So this is a very strategic sector. Space powers, different space powers are coming, right? We are also thinking about, and we are also having this concept of space wars, right? Then we have to carve niche product and services, because this is a very technologically intensive area, and there are some very specific services which can be given with respect to the space domain. So these services need to be carved out. What are the key sectors which are impacted by space technology? The very first is supply chain and transportation. When we have an efficient space system with respect to the satellites, that would definitely increase the efficiency with respect to the logistics. We all know that the logistics costs in India are quite high. So as to reduce the logistics costs, we need to have an intelligent transport system, right? And that can only be possible with the robust PVT services, positional, velocity and timing services. And this what we call as the GPS services. And this can be only possible once we have a robust satellite system. Then we have food and beverages. You must have seen that recently we had the astronaut Shubhanshu Shukla carrying out the experiments in microgravity with respect to the effects or the working of microorganisms. So this is also very important with respect to the food and beverages. Then we have defense. A robust structure, a robust construct of space domain definitely enhances the intelligence and surveillance capacity of the state, therefore giving a robust national security architecture. Then we have retail and consumer goods. It is but obvious that if we have robust satellite communication, it would enhance, it would make these e-commerce players more robust. And we would also be able to provide different services in the remote corners of the country, right? Then we have disaster management. As I told you, I gave the example of Nisar. Very important. So if we have these satellite systems in place, definitely we'll be able to mitigate these disasters. Then we have humanitarian efforts. We'll be better able to track the drug trafficking or the human trafficking, right, taking place across the borders. And then we have access to prosperity. Why? Because if we have a robust satellite system, robust space domain, this would definitely reduce the digital divide. And it would make sure that the benefits of socio-economic aspects are equitably distributed to different sections of the society. For example, in terms of the education or in terms of the e-health services, you must have heard about the Sanjeevani, e-Sanjeevani, where teleconsultation is made possible. So these are the areas where private sector, incorporation of private sector can definitely act as a boon for the overall sector. Now, what are the challenges and issues faced by the startups in the country? The very first is high capital requirement. The overall services being offered or the kind of research activities which these players are doing, they are highly capital intensive and they required long-term funding. And that's the reason what you have to understand is that the traditional lenders are not really inclined to give funds to these space startups. And therefore, we need more of venture capitals or other funds which are basically facilitated by the government. There's a need for long-term funding, especially when we talk about the launch vehicles. It's a risky business, right? Then there are regulatory challenges, very, very important. See, understand that we have already come up with the space policy, Indian space policy in the year 2023. Which talks about explicitly talks about giving more options to the private sector in the overall space domain. But what you have to understand is still we do not have a robust statutory framework. Still we do not have a legal framework with respect to making sure that what are the aspects of insurance, what are the aspects of liability, what are the aspects of indemnity, right? Or what are the powers of in-space. We do not have a statutory framework. So that is really needed. You must be aware of the Space Activities Bill. So that must be promulgated. So it is still evolving. Then we have the complex regulatory landscape with respect to the licensing of these private players. Let's talk about the spectrum allocation of these private players. So this is again a very grave area, right? Serious concern. Then we have infrastructure gaps. These private space startups, they have resource crunch. They do not have the adequate facilities, for example, testing facilities. And you must be aware that we have just one launch pad of Sriharikota. More launch pads are required, more testing facilities are required so that these private players can definitely integrate and definitely come out with better products and services, right? Talent shortage. Why? Because see, we have some of the very important institutes in the country. For example, Indian Institute of Remote Sensing or Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology. But what we see is that most of these people who are coming from these colleges, they go to different countries, other countries, and work over there, primarily because those countries are providing better incentives. And there is a kind of a brain drain which we are witnessing. So this must be stopped, right? It is difficult to attract and retain the skilled professionals. Then we have competition from the international players, for example, the US, EU or China. They have well established and significant funding. That is the reason I told you that when we talk about NASA, NASA has been in the imagination of every Indian, right? So this is because the kind of funding it has, the kind of importance the government is giving to the functioning of the NASA, right? And also, what we are witnessing now is that NASA is utilizing the private platforms of the SpaceX. So definitely private players are also important. Then we have the aspects of space debris and environmental concerns. What we are observing is that there has been an increasing flux of these satellites and other components in the space domain. And this might lead to a particular catastrophe, right? And there is a particular syndrome which we refer to. Do let me know in the comment section. What is that particular syndrome? So there is a need for more environmentally responsible practices also with respect to the private sector incorporation in the space domain. What should be the way forward? The very first is increased government support. Government is already doing its enough, but again, we need more of these venture capital funding. And there has to be the incorporation of the private sector so that we can have a kind of a model where there is a joint venture between the private sector and the government entities, and then providing the funding for different projects, right? And regulatory reforms are needed. There has to be a particular robust framework with respect to the legal aspects of the space domain, right? It must be given a legal backing. Then we have building infrastructure, launch pads, or testing facilities or manufacturing hubs for these private sector entities so that they can carry out their work in a more cost-effective manner, right? In a more efficient manner. Also, we can have this particular idea of space technology parks where we have a cluster approach, where in a particular area, we have different private sector enterprises focusing upon a particular domain in the space aspect, right? So that is a cluster approach we can have. Then fostering international collaborations. If ISRO and NASA can collaborate, why not private entities in India can collaborate with the private entities in different countries around the world? Be it, let's say, a particular private entity in India collaborating with the SpaceX, definitely. And therefore, we would also see a very good, robust technology transfer, right? So very important. Advanced technology and markets. We can have collaboration of Indian space startups with that of NASA or that of JAXA of Japan or European Space Agency, right? Then we have training and skill development. What we still see is that the kind of curriculum we have in the colleges, it's still obsolete. There are very few colleges in the country who have that relevant curriculum. So the curriculum needs to be updated. There has to be an updation with respect to the design of the curriculum, specialized programs and certifications. For example, those engineers or scientists working in the space domain, they must be given the certifications so that they can raise up their ladder, right? Then we have sustainability in space operations. There must be focus upon eco-friendly satellite technologies, just to make sure that we do not have these situation of catastrophe in the space. Then market expansion. We should not just look at the domestic opportunities we have. We should also explore the other opportunities. For example, there are many opportunities being offered by the African countries, or let's say the Latin American countries, or even Southeast Asian countries. So why not explore that particular domain? That is very important. So what we see is that definitely there has been an impetus given by the government. There has been more collaboration between the government and these private sector enterprises so that ISRO can focus upon more important domains. But still there are regulatory issues. There are issues with respect to the resource crunch these private sector enterprises are having. So we need to focus upon this particular domain. Let's have a mains practice question. Space startups in India have the potential to revolutionize the country's space economy. However, they face several challenges related to the capital, regulation, and infrastructure. Discuss the current status of space startups in India, their importance, the challenges they face, and the measures needed to unlock their full potential. It's a very comprehensive question. Do write an answer to this. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also mention in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the silent pandemic, understanding the antimicrobial resistance. So we have the Indian Council of Medical Research, which would soon start the wastewater surveillance with respect to 10 viruses across 50 cities. And ICMR has already been conducting the antimicrobial resistance surveillance across several hospitals in the country. Now, what you must understand is that we have certain microbes in nature, for example, bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, which are disease causing in the living bodies. In order to treat these diseases, the medical science has evolved and has come up with various antimicrobes. For example, we have the antibiotics or antivirals, right? Antifungals, antimalarials, right? But what we have observed is with time that these antimicrobes have proved to be ineffective against these diseases, primarily because of the overuse and misuse of these antimicrobes. And this has led to the creation of certain resistance in these microbes with respect to these medications. And this is proving to be a very serious public health concern. And therefore, antimicrobial resistance becomes very important to be understood. And this is a part of GS2 health. Now, what is antimicrobial resistance? As I told you, that it is a resistance acquired by the microorganisms, be it bacteria, be it the viruses, be it the fungi, be it the parasites, against antimicrobial drugs. For example, we can have the antibiotics, antivirals, antimalarials, right? And what is the consequence of this particular thing? What happens? See, if we have these antibiotics and if they are proving to be ineffective, what it means is that these microbes, they have become resistant with respect to these medications. So the disease would increase and the disease would spread among the population. And this is a very serious public health concern, right? And these standard treatments, these medications would become ineffective and the infection would persist and it would also spread. Is the resistance being developed in these microbes, is it a natural phenomena? The answer is yes. Because as we have these evolution of the microbes, definitely the resistance also increases. But because of the overuse and misuse of these drugs, of these antimicrobes, for example, the antivirals or antibiotics, what happens is that the pace is aggravated. And we are left with very few medications which are then effective, right? Then we also have the superbugs. What it means is that there are certain microbes on whom almost all the medications have become ineffective. They cannot be basically tackled by any of these medications. So what we call them as superbugs. The World Health Organization says that the antimicrobial resistance is one of the top 10 threats to the global health. And this gives you a very clear picture, this infographic. It says that the public health impact of the antimicrobial resistance has been significant and it has reportedly caused almost 3 lakh deaths in India in the year 2019. Can you imagine? 3 lakh deaths just because of the antimicrobial resistance. And if you just look at this particular thing, where the AMR is taking place, we have almost 53% of the cases of the AMR as the inpatient department. Then we have 31% as the outpatient department, and then we have 3% in the emergency. Inpatient is almost 53%. What we call as the hospital-acquired infections, or in the other words, the nosocomial infections. Remember this word, the hospital-acquired infections. So this becomes a very serious public health concern. So how the antibiotic resistance spreads? Let's say we have the animals who are being given the antibiotics, and then there is a gradual development of resistance in their bodies. And then we have the fertilizers or the water containing the animal feces and drug resistance bacteria. It goes into the soil, ultimately into the plants. Or we can have the meat which is directly derived, or any other animal product which is derived from the animals itself and then consumed by the humans. So there is the transfer of these drug resistance bacteria in the human bodies. So it's a kind of a vicious cycle, and it not just includes the humans, but also it includes the other elements, for example, the animals as well as the plants, right? Now, what are the reasons for the spreads of AMR? The very first is high prevalence of communicable diseases. Especially in a country like India, which is still a developing country, we have a lot of prevalence of the issues with respect to the water, sanitation and hygiene. And this ultimately leads to the increasing burden with respect to the communicable disease. For example, we have tuberculosis, diarrhea, respiratory infections. And ultimately, the risk of AMR increases. Then we have overburdened public health systems. We still have a dependence upon the public health delivery systems, especially at the grassroots level, which is still inadequate. We do not have the adequate surveillance capacity, adequate diagnostics. So therefore, many times what happens is that a particular population suffers from the AMR, and still we don't know about that. And then that particular disease spreads to the different segments of the population, right? So there is the aspect of inadequate laboratory capacity or targeted treatment. Then we have poor infection control practices. There are issues with respect to the hygiene in the hospitals and the clinics. As I told you, we have the hospital-acquired infections, nosocomial infections. 53%, almost 53% are the inpatient, right? Then we have the injudicious use. See, what you have to understand is that these doses of the antimicrobes, be it the antibiotics or the antivirals, the whole prescription has to be followed. But what we see is that there is the overuse sometimes, or the misuse, and ultimately there is a development of resistance, right? There have been the overprescription. Many times what we see is that these patients, if we have someone has sore throat or something like that, he goes to a doctor and he in fact compels a doctor to give him the antibiotics, even when it is not needed. And if the doctor doesn't give him that, he thinks that the doctor is not well qualified. So this is the kind of perception we have, right? There are aspects of self-medication, incomplete antibiotic courses, and unnecessary use, not even required. And there is also the unregulated over-the-counter availability. What do we mean by that? If people are suffering from any disease, they directly go to these chemists, the shops, and they demand these antibiotics, which should ideally be not given. But they are being freely sold over the counter. There is no restriction. So that is what increases the resistance in the body. Then there is lack of awareness. People are not really aware of how crucial this aspect of antimicrobial resistance is. Such a serious threat to the overall public health aspect, right? Then we have limited surveillance. It is difficult to track, as I told you, that still we do not have the disease surveillance mechanism. That is still not robust. And in a country like India, where we have the majority of the population dependent upon the government health delivery systems, and the government health delivery systems, they're not adequate. And ultimately what happens is many times these diseases spread, and ultimately the AMR also spreads. What are the implications of the spread of AMR? Healthcare impact. If we have more cases of these AMR, if the resistance increases continuously, most of the medications would become ineffective. See, please understand, we have a limited pool of medicines. We have a limited pool of medications with respect to treating these microbes. But if the resistance increases, definitely most of the medications would prove to be ineffective, right? And there would be increased mortality rates. Then we have increased healthcare costs. Here we are not just talking with respect to the individual. The costs being incurred by the individual, what we call as the out-of-pocket expenditure. We are also talking about the expenditure being borne by the government in the form of the insurance or the private entities, right? Resistant infections, they become more expensive and prolonged therapies are needed. If a particular medication is not working, you'll have to come up with more intensive medication, which would obviously be more costly, right? Or other therapies. Challenges in medical procedures. Different. Let's say a person has to be operated or a surgery has to be conducted. But if there is an aspect of antimicrobial resistance, that would not be possible. Or let's say in the cases of the chemotherapies, because that would make the person more prone to mortality, right? Limitations in treatment options. So what we see is that previously those infections which were treatable, now they have become untreatable, because those medications which previously used to work, now they're not working. They are now proving to be ineffective. So ultimately, it is resulting into more of fatalities. Look at this particular chart, infographic. It would show you that the global deaths in 2019, more than 12 lakh deaths were attributed to the AMR. Much more than that of the HIV/AIDS, or let's say the breast cancer or malaria. So this tells us about the grave situation with respect to these AMR. What have been the measures taken to address the antimicrobial resistance? At the country level, we have had the national program on AMR containment. The very objective of this particular program is to increase the surveillance capacity in different hospitals across the countries, so that we have the adequate surveillance, so that we can understand that which are all the areas where we are witnessing the rise in the infections and the rise of the AMR cases. Then we have the National Action Plan on AMR. The very objective of this particular action plan is to focus upon the One Health approach. When we are talking about the One Health approach, as I already told you, it includes all the elements of the health, be it the animal health, the plant health, as well as the human health. Then we have the AMR Surveillance and Research Network. Again, the whole objective is to increase the surveillance network. Then we have AMR research and international collaborations. As I told you in this particular article also, ICMR has been conducting various surveillances with respect to the AMR and also other viruses, right? Antibiotic Stewardship Program. ICMR has come into collaboration with countries like Norway or Sweden, where it is trying to adopt the best practices which are being followed, the best technological interventions which are being followed in these countries, right? Pilot projects in the India to control the misuse and overuse of antibiotics. We also have some of the steps taken by the Drug Controller General of India. You must be aware that the DCGI, it basically banned 40 fixed dose combinations. Do read about this. What is fixed dose combinations? Because these medicines were being used extensively without any prescription. And ultimately, it was increasing the burden of AMR. So the DCGI, it basically stopped these fixed dose combinations. Then what have been the global measures which have been taken? The very first is the World Antimicrobial Week. So we have this particular week starting from 18th till 24th of November. The very objective is to spread the information with respect to the awareness of the AMR across the population. Then we have the Global Antimicrobial Resistance and Use Surveillance Systems. Again, a WHO sponsored program where it focuses upon increasing the information different stakeholders must have the adequate information with respect to antimicrobial resistance. What should be the way forward? The very first is public education campaigns. People need to be told that this is a very serious public health concern and they should not take it lightly. They should not just overuse or misuse these antimicrobes. For example, the antibiotics, right? It has to be sold on prescription basis. Mass media, community outreach must be there, including social media, the print media, the electronic media. Then we have the antibiotic stewardship program. Already ICMR is conducting various programs, collaborating with other players around the world, but this has to be increased. Track and optimize the antibiotic use across the country, right? Regulation of antibiotic sales. There has to be stricter regulation on the sale of antibiotics. You must be aware of the red line campaign. Those medicines which are marked with a red line, they can only be sold on the basis of prescription. This was a very good initiative. So we need to come up with more such initiatives so as to restrict the sale of these antibiotics only in those cases. They must be given only in those cases where it is really needed, not otherwise. Expand the AMR surveillance. Establish a nationwide AMR surveillance so as to know which are those regions and pockets where we are witnessing more of the cases of the AMR. Then we have developed new technologies. You must be aware of the phage technology, where we don't use the antibiotics, where we are using viruses to basically kill the bacteria. So this is a phage technology. So we need to come up with more such technological interventions. So what we need to understand is it's a very serious public health concern. We should not go for the overuse or misuse of these antimicrobes, especially the antibiotics. And there has to be the spread of the information in the public with respect to the ill effects of the development of the resistance in these microbes. Let's have a mains practice question. Antimicrobial resistance is not just a medical challenge, but a silent pandemic with economic, social, and developmental implications. In this context, examine the causes and consequences of AMR in India. Suggest a multi-pronged strategy to address the crisis at the national and global levels. 10 marks, 150 words. Please do write a particular answer to this question. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which talks about the satellite-based internet. The gist of the article is that we have the ground-based network comprising of the cables and the towers to provide the communication services. But it has its own limitations. For example, let's say we have a particular area which has very less of a human population. Now, to come up with the ground-based network comprising of this cables and towers in this particular area is economically unviable. The second situation is that in the times of disasters, natural disasters, might be flood or let's say we have the earthquake, the ground-based network is destroyed and ultimately the connectivity is lost. So what should be the alternative? The alternative is the space-based internet, satellite-based internet. Now, this particular column, it's written in a very simple manner. It talks about the satellite communication through three different orbits. We have the geostationary orbit, we have the medium Earth orbit, and we have the low Earth orbit. And it also says that this particular technology, it has a dual use capability. Because recently we saw that though it is mostly used in the civil cases, civil areas. For example, it was used in the internet connectivity with respect to when we had a cyclone in Texas, right? So as to provide the rescue and rehabilitation efforts. But it has also the military applications, which we observed in cases of Ukrainian forces using the Starlink, using the services offered by the Starlink. So definitely it's a very strategic area and India must invest in this particular domain, which is what the article is talking about. Ground-based network use cables and towers. Most common form of internet provision is this particular thing. However, it has limitations. Reliance on physical infrastructure makes them economically unviable and sparsely where the population is quite less, and vulnerable to disruptions from natural disasters like floods and earthquake, often cannot meet the demand for on-the-go connectivity. Let's say you're traveling in the train, right? So you need a kind of a connectivity which is constant, which is not available with respect to the ground-based network. Satellite internet emerges as a powerful solution to these challenges. Functioning on a global scale, it provides extensive and resilient coverage. More broader than that of the ground-based network. This coverage functions regardless of the terrain or the presence of terrestrial infrastructure. It can be deployed rapidly to manage the sudden demand surge, and also provides connectivity within moving platforms like airplanes and remote sites such as offshore oil rigs. So with respect, let's say we are doing this oil exploration, from where the internet connectivity would come, right? So you need satellites connectivity. The satellite internet is not merely a backup system, it is a transformative technology with the potential to reshape the digital economy, civil infrastructure, and military strategy. As I told you, it has a dual use aspect, both including the civil as well as the military domain. What are the features of satellite internet? The advent of satellite mega constellations. Do we mean by constellations? A group of satellite performing a task together in sync, right? Such as Starlink signals a new era in the space-based internet. These comprise of hundreds or even thousands of satellites orbiting hundreds kilometers above the earth. This internet in the sky offers plethora of applications in military operations, disaster response, healthcare, agriculture, and transportation. Use these things. Know that these are different applications. Possibly in the prelims, a question can come that what are the applications of the satellite internet, right? Satellite-based internet. However, this technology has a dual use nature, serving both civil as well as military ends. This introduces complex security dynamics. Contemporary events, for example, we had the Hurricane Harvey struck on the Texas coast in 2017, knocked out 70% of the cell towers. The ground-based networks was completely uprooted. And therefore, in this particular time, we had the Viasat's satellite internet becoming a lifeline for the rescue operations. Similarly, in the Russia-Ukraine war, SpaceX's Starlink has been pivotal for the Ukrainian defense forces. They have been constantly using the Starlink so as to enhance their defense capabilities. Ukrainians even fitted Starlink devices on drones to bypass the Russian jamming systems. Satellite internet also enhances the operational readiness in the isolated conflict zones. For example, the use of this particular satellite internet by the Indian Army in Siachen Glacier. Conversely, its borderless nature facilitates the illegal use. Security forces in India have captured the smuggled Starlink devices from insurgent groups and drug rackets. Can you just imagine that these drug syndicates, they have been using these satellite-based devices? These instances reveal the control over satellite internet infrastructure is becoming a new dimension of national power. How does the satellite internet work? So the satellite internet network is composed of space segment and a ground segment. So we have the two segments, one in the space and one on the ground, right? In the very first article, we talked about the ground-based segment. The space segment consists of the satellites in the orbit, while the ground segment includes all the equipment on the Earth. The satellites are the most capital-intensive component. They carry the communication payloads for the data transmission and have a service life of almost 2 decades. Their deployment requires careful planning, especially concerning the orbital altitude, which determines the satellite's capabilities and coverage. So this is a very, precision task to basically make the satellite orbit or satellite move in a particular orbit, right? There are 3 main orbits. We have the geostationary orbit. You can just look at this particular infographic, the geostationary Earth orbit, almost at a height of 35 kilometers. Then we have the medium Earth orbit. Look at this, medium Earth, from 5,000 to 12,000 kilometers. And then we have the low Earth orbit. We have the low Earth orbit from 500 kilometers to 1,500. Also, this particular infographic, which has been published in the article itself. Low Earth orbit, this. So the range might vary, and both these sources are from different areas. So, but you can have a general outlook. And geostationary Earth orbit, and then we have the medium Earth orbit. So these are the relative positions of the satellites from the surface of the Earth, right? Now, what are the differences between the satellites deployed in different orbits? So we have the geosatellites, geostationary Earth orbit satellite, orbit at around 35,800 kilometers above the equator. They match the Earth's rotation, allowing them to remain stationary relative to a point on the ground. So with respect to a point on the ground, this satellite, the geo-orbit satellite, would always appear to be stationary. So they move at a very fast pace and they are at a very high distance, a very large distance from the Earth. This high altitude allows the geo-satellite to cover nearly 1/3 of the Earth's surface. So the coverage of this particular satellite is quite broad in nature, right? 1/3 of the Earth's surface, though not polar regions. Viasat's Global Express system is a notable example. Geosatellites are also typically large. They act as a bent pipe, simply relaying signals back to the Earth without processing them. So they basically take signals from a particular location A on the Earth, take it and then relay it to point B, right? So they're working as bent pipes. Their significant drawback is a high propagation latency. That is, the time they take to basically transfer the signal is quite more in nature. The long distance signals must travel, result in delays, making the geosystems unsuitable for time sensitive applications. Obviously, so if you are having video conferencing, you would not use these geo satellites, right, which are placed in the geostationary Earth orbit, because the latency is quite high. Or real-time transactions. Medium Earth orbit satellites operate at altitudes of around 2,000 to 35,000 kilometers. They offer a compromise between geo and LEO systems. Their latency is lower than that of the geo satellites, but still they require a constellation for global coverage. The O3b MEO constellation, this is a particular satellite in the MEO orbit, right? For instance, consists of 20 satellites. However, their latency is often insufficient for many real-time applications, and the satellites remain large and costly to launch. Then we have the low Earth orbit satellites. orbit at altitudes below 2000 km, their proximity to Earth results in very low latency. That is, the kind of time they take to transfer the signal is very less. Because why? The reason is that they're very near to the surface of the Earth. So ultimately, the signals take less time to transfer. They are also smaller, often table size, making them cheaper and quicker to deploy. Their main disadvantage is their smaller coverage area. A single Starlink low Earth orbit satellite footprint is comparable to an Indian metropolitan city. So it's covering just a particular area of a city. Whereas the geostationary Earth orbit satellite, it's covering almost 1/3 of the surface area of the Earth. LEO systems form the mega constellations. These are the network of thousands of satellites. For example, Starlink has over 7,000 satellites with plans up to increasing to almost 42,000 satellites. How do mega constellations work? So we have the LEO constellations leverage their numbers to turn limitations into strength. The smaller satellites are capable of onboard signal processing. This enhances the data transmission efficiency, improves the signal quality, and allows for greater flexibility. As in the geo satellites, what we saw was that they're just acting as a relaying point. They're just transferring the signals. Whereas the LEO satellites, the satellites in the low Earth orbit, they are also processing the information. So the quality enhances, right? This onboard intelligence simplifies the user terminals. The terminals become more smaller, cheaper, and more accessible. So the ground-based systems which are required in case of LEO satellites, it's not that complex in nature, right? Because all the task is being done by the satellites themselves. A key innovation was the use of optical inter-satellite links. These allow the satellites to communicate directly among each other. So these satellites communicate among each other, right? This creates a true internet in the sky. This network can route the data globally with minimal resistance on the ground stations, reducing the latency and increasing the efficiency. So the latency in the low Earth orbit satellites is quite low in nature, whereas in geo satellites, it's quite high. However, maintaining the continuous connectivity is a challenge. LEO satellites move at nearly 27,000 kilometers per hour. To ensure uninterrupted services, the network must seamlessly hand off the connection from one satellite to the next. That is, transfer let's say it's traveling around the Earth, so it must transfer that particular signal to the other satellite so that it can cater to a particular location on the Earth, right? That is what the handoff means. This is achieved with steerable antennas that can track multiple users. You must have seen the spotlights on the stage. So these spotlights continuously move. So just imagine a particular spotlight as a LEO satellite and it is focusing upon a particular area. So if one spotlight goes, you have the other satellite coming and taking its the signals and then transferring it further. What are the applications of satellites internet? For the end user, the modern LEO satellites internet is a major advancement. User terminals are now compact and easy to set up. That's the best advantage because the processing takes place in the satellite itself, so it's very easy to set up. However, the service is still more expensive than terrestrial broadband. The cost is often justified for those in remote areas or in industries where connectivity is paramount. So again, if you have very strategic applications, definitely the cost is justified. The future promises even greater accessibility. Companies like ASC, Space Mobile, and Starlink are testing direct to smartphone services. But for that, the smartphones need to have the adequate hardware so that they can connect with those satellites, right? This innovation could eliminate the need of separate user terminals altogether. As technology becomes mainstream, specialized hardware may be integrated into the device, for example, the laptops or the smartphones. The application of the satellite internet are vast and transformative. Network access to remote areas, for example, we have the internet of everything. Earlier we had the internet of things. Now we have internet of everything, right? Almost every component is connected with the internet. In transportation, it would enhance the navigation systems. In public administration, we have the disaster management. It can power the smart cities, provide early warnings, coordinate the rescue efforts in rescue and rehabilitation efforts and disaster management. The healthcare sector can focus upon the telemedicine. For example, we have eSanjeevani, right? And remote patient monitoring, agriculture for precision farming. In the very first article, we discuss all these applications. Crop health analysis. It also has significant applications in the environmental monitoring, energy exploration with respect to the mining or prospective mines in a particular area. Therefore, so this communication becomes very important, right? Therefore, satellite internet presents immense opportunities, but also creates complex security and regulatory challenges because it has dual use aspect, both in civil as well as military domains. Nations now recognize satellite internet as a new dimension of power. It is imperative, it is important for countries like India to develop the comprehensive strategies to integrate the technology into national resilience plan. India should also leverage it to bridge the digital divide and foster economic development, right? So we can definitely use, as I told in the very first article, use these technologies to bridge the digital divide and then usher in more prosperity for the people. Finally, active participation in shaping its international governance is crucial, as these mega constellations will define the next era of global connectivity, because they are not restricted to a particular border. They are for the entire global community. So there has to be effective governance. So we have this particular infographic. You can have a look. It gives us a comparative picture with respect to the low Earth orbit, the medium Earth orbit, and the geostationary orbit. Look at this. The relative distance, it keeps on increasing with respect to these three orbits. This is also a comparative chart. You can just have a look. And again, the various applications can be seen from here, right? Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the employment linked incentive scheme. So we have this particular column where the authors are trying to basically point towards the flaws in this particular scheme. What they're saying is that the ELI scheme is basically framed in such a manner that it is trying to give incentive to the employers. What they're saying is three things. First, they're saying that considering the dynamics we have in the country with respect to the overall market scenario, they're saying that India is a country which is a labor surplus economy. So we should focus upon the aspects of the employees, not employers. Second thing, what they're saying is that there is an aspect of employment and employability. Through this particular scheme, the government is focusing upon employment, increasing the employment, but not employability. That is, we do not have the adequate number of people who have the adequate skill in a particular domain. So the government rather should focus upon skill enhancement and knowledge enhancement. Third thing which the government is trying to focus upon is, through this particular scheme, that we have the formal and the informal sector. This particular scheme is focusing upon the formal sector, which already has access to the benefits with respect to different government schemes. But this scheme is not focusing upon the informal sector, which has a major chunk of the labor force in the country. So this is what the three arguments are, and we'll see what are the different dimensions being offered by the authors. But first, let's know about this particular scheme. So this was a particular scheme which is known as the employment linked incentive. This screenshot snippet has been taken from the PIB itself. The Union Cabinet basically came up with this particular scheme, the employment linked incentive scheme, to support employment generation and enhance employability and social security across all the sectors, with special focus upon the manufacturing sector. This is also what the authors are saying, that you are focusing upon the manufacturing sector, but primarily the labor resides in the agriculture and the services. Why they are not being considered, right? Under the scheme, while the first time employees will get the 1 month's wage up to 15,000, the employers will be given incentives for a period of 2 years for generating the additional employment with extended benefits for another 2 years. So we have the first aspect of the 1 month's wage up to 15,000, and then there are certain incentives for the employers. On one hand, we have part A, which talks about the incentives given to the employees, and then we have part B, the support which is given to the employers. Now, what the author says, employment linked incentive scheme to support the employment generation outlay with almost 1 lakh crore. However, this raises serious concerns about the target population in a labor market where capital labor asymmetries exist, the formal-informal sector divide exists, and the persistent mismatch between employment opportunities and employability to continue marginalize large sections of the workforce. What they're trying to say is that through this particular scheme, we're not going to have an inclusive structure. It would continue to marginalize the most of the people working in the labor sector, particularly the low skilled and the informal. What they're saying, problems with the scheme. While being an ambitious attempt to generate employment, the ELI scheme reflects an employer-centric approach. We are focusing upon the employer, not the employee. By providing the fiscal incentives to the employers for creating employment, particularly in the manufacturing sector, the scheme overlooks the persistent mismatch between employability and actual employment opportunities. The employer might employ someone, right? He may come up with more number of jobs. But the point is, what kind of jobs are being offered, right? Are the people who are working in the labor force, do they have the adequate skills with them? That is a question which need to be asked. Are they contributing productively to the economy, right? This may further lead to the strengthening of the bargaining power of the employers rather than the workers, which may enhance the already high wage gaps. If you are just having this approach that the employers must increase the number of employees, the employers would hire people on their own at their own terms and conditions. So the employers would get even a lower salary, right? The employers would have more bargaining power. This would prove detrimental for the workers, especially from the informal and low skilled segments who remain excluded from the benefits of the scheme. At the heart of the India's labor market crisis lies not just the lack of jobs, but a severe skill mismatch. Now, this data is very important, can be used in the mains examination. The economic survey of 24-25 reveals that only 8.25% of the graduates are employed in roles matching their qualifications. Just 8.25. What they did, now they're doing it. The kind of studies they did, now they're applying it. Only 8.25. Worse, over 53% of the graduates and 36% of the postgraduates are underemployed in semi-skilled or elementary occupations. Wage outcomes, only 4.2% of the graduates in specialized roles earn between 4 lakh to 8 lakhs per annum, while nearly 46% in low skill jobs earn less than 1 lakh. Can you imagine? 46%, less than 1 lakhs, nothing. These figures expose not just the inefficiency of India's education to employment pipeline, but also the futility of employer-centric incentives. Give employee-centric incentives, not employer-centric. Workers lack the skills that industry demands. Only 4.9% of the Indian youths from 15 to 29 years of age have received the formal vocational training. In the absence of robust skilling infrastructure, the ELI scheme does little more than play the employers to absorb an underprepared workforce. You have these workforce which is not properly trained, you are just absorbing it for no reasons, right? The scheme tends to prioritize the sectors and the firms that are already integrated into the formal economy. So we have the formal economy. You are just giving incentives to the formal economy, not the informal one. Those who have already registered with the EPFO, while this design may seem administratively sound, it indirectly marginalizes 90% of the labor force which is in the informal sector, who already are devoid of social security, formal contracts, and other benefits. In doing so, it risks the establishing structural inequalities. This restriction and consequent exclusion may aggravate existing dual labor market structure, where the formal sector is provided with state support and incentives, while the informal sector remains unrecognized. If you will continue doing so, the formal sector would always, would be getting the increasing benefits from the state, and the informal sector, which needs dire support of the state, would continue to remain in that particular state of affairs, right? Such a scheme may also be indirectly reinforcing the inequality by channelizing the fiscal allocation towards relatively well-off enterprises, leaving behind the low-wage, unregistered workers. States' substantial investment in the formal sector also bypasses the informal workforce, which continues to absorb the bulk of new labor market entrants. Where most of these people who are graduating from the colleges, where they're going? In the informal sector. So try to have a scheme for them, not the formal sector. What is more worrying is that the scheme could end up normalizing the disguised unemployment, where people seem that they're working. It seems that people are working, but effectively they're not, contributing productively to the economy. The people appear to be employed, but are in not fact contributing to the output, which is common in sectors such as agriculture and informal services. Result is low productivity and stagnant or low wages. Enterprises might resort to labeling the existing jobs as new employment to claim the subsidy, right? Just to claim the benefit, they can already, they have the positions which are already working. They would claim that these are the new employment opportunities which we have opened, the employers, right? Just to claim the benefits. The scheme's special focus on the manufacturing also reveals a sectoral blind spot. While manufacturing remains critical to the economic transformation, its employment elasticity in India has been steadily declining due to increased automation. In the manufacturing, we have been witnessing the integration of technology in the supply chains, be it artificial intelligence or blockchain or something. So there are less of humans involved in the manufacturing, right? That is what you have to understand. Today, manufacturing contributes less than 13% of the total employment, while agriculture and services together employ more than 70% of the workforce. By disproportionately privileging the manufacturing through extended incentives, the ELI scheme may further marginalize the large segment of the workforce, particularly women, rural youth, and informal workers, who are more likely to be employed in low-skill services. This sectoral imbalance represents an outdated assumption that manufacturing sector is a primary engine of the growth. What should be done? Alternative. Although the ELI scheme is an attempt to address India's unemployment crisis, the policy design indicates that it will deepen the structural inequalities in the labor market. It is not going to basically create a more inclusive structure. Rather, it would deepen the divisions in the society. This is what the authors are saying. It also highlights the absence of mechanisms to address the skill development, improve the job quality or social security for the workers in the informal sector. See, what should be the objective? To improve the conditions of the workers, primarily in the informal sector. But through this ELI scheme, you are focusing upon the formal sector. So what about the informal sector? Their condition would continue to deteriorate, right? Investment in skilling and education reforms will instead benefit the low-skilled workers. Further, more initiatives should be shifted from short-term employment generation to long-term sustained employment opportunities and enhance productivity. So that, how we can do that? by focusing upon the skill enhancement, right? Without compromising on labor rights and bargaining power. Finally, employment generation drive should avoid dealing with headcounts, rather focusing upon the equitable and sustainable development strategy. Don't just count the number of employments you have created, rather the quality of the employment which is being generated. That is what the authors are talking about. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the Lok Sabha Speaker setting in motion the procedure with respect to the removal of the High Court judge. So we already saw what happened. There were allegations of corruption as hordes of half-burned currency notes were found at the residence of Justice Yashwant Verma. So we have this particular motion which has been set in with respect to the removal of this particular judge. The Speaker constitutes 3-member panel to probe into the charges against Justice Verma for over the finding of the burned currency notes at his residence. The Speaker of the Lok Sabha set in motion the process of removing the Justice Yashwant Verma of the Allahabad High Court by admitting a motion signed by 146 members. We will see the procedure, don't worry about that. And constituting a 3-member inquiry committee. The inquiry committee primarily consists of a Supreme Court judge, a Chief Justice of a High Court, and a distinguished jurist. The inquiry committee comprising of the Supreme Court Judge Justice Arvind Kumar, Madras High Court Chief Justice Manendra Mohan Srivastav, and Senior Karnataka High Court Advocate B.V. Acharya. The committee will submit its report as early as possible. The proposal for the removal of Justice Verma will remain pending till the receipt of the report of the inquiry committee. He said that he accepted the proposal received on July 21st and constituted a 3-member panel for the removal of the judge from his post in accordance with Section 3, Subclause 2 of the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. We have certain constitutional articles which talk about the removal, but the procedure with respect to the removal has been enshrined in this particular act, which is Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. The facts connected in the present case point towards the corruption and are eligible for action as per Article 124, Article 217 and Article 218 of the Constitution of India. Earlier, the Chief Justice of India, the former Chief Justice of India, Sanjeev Khanna, asked Justice Verma to resign or face impeachment proceedings after receiving the reports of the in-house probe committee. As Justice Verma refused to quit, CJI Khanna forwarded the report to the President and the Prime Minister for the removal of the judge, and therefore we are seeing the moving of the motion for the removal. Impeachment proceedings, we have how it basically moves. It has been taken from the PRS. A removal motion signed by 100 members in case of Lok Sabha and 50 members in case of Rajya Sabha is to be given to the Speaker. It depends upon the chair of the house, be it the Speaker or the chairman, whether to admit or to refuse it. That is what you have to understand. If the motion is admitted, then there is a 3-member committee to investigate into the charges. It comprises of a Supreme Court judge, a Chief Justice of a High Court, and a distinguished jurist. Do remember this, right? If the committee finds the judge to be guilty of the charges, proved misbehavior or incapacity, these are the 2 grounds. Proved misbehavior or incapacity, the House which the motion was introduced can take up the consideration of the motion. Special majority is required. Majority of the total membership of the House and majority of the 2/3 members present and voting. Once the House in which the removal motion introduced passes it with special majority, it goes to the second House which has to pass with a special majority also, right? After the motion is passed, an address is presented to the President for the removal of the judge. The President then passes the order for removing the judge. This is the whole process with respect to the removal of the judge. Can be important with respect to the prelims. This is a detailed description. You can also have a look. Whatever has been told here, it's just a more detailed explanation written over here. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to one of the very important elements of parliamentary functioning, which is the Public Accounts Committee. So we have the Public Accounts Committee under the chairmanship of K.C. Venugopal. It has said that we have the tolls collecting the money at different places on the highways. What it has said is that at those places where the cost has already been recovered, these tolls, the cost which they are charging at the tolls, it must be reduced or it must be completely scrapped because the cost has been recovered, right? So the tolls on the national highways continuing in perpetuity should be reduced or scrapped once the capital and the maintenance costs are recovered, the Public Accounts Committee has said. It has also proposed a tariff authority for the toll determination to ensure the fairness. The PAC, under the chairmanship of Congress MP K.C. Venugopal. Now this is important. You have the opposition member acting as a chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, has proposed a technology-driven transparent mechanism for the automatic toll refund or waiver when highways are under maintenance or unfit. The concept of perpetual toll collection began in 2008, that you continue it for all the times, no stop. 2008 amendment allowing a toll collection to continue even after the project the costs have been recovered. This was further formalized in 2023 fee rules amendment, which explicitly permits the tolling beyond the concession period. See, there's a concession period. Once you have recovered the costs, ideally it should be stopped, but still they are continuing to collect the tolls. After a build operate toll, now this is an investment model, right, on the basis of which a particular project is constructed. Project's concession ends, the asset is transferred to the National Highways Authority of India and is operated as a publicly funded toll plaza with revenues going to the Consolidated Fund of India. This is important. Once the concession period is over, the asset is transferred to the NHAI and the revenues which are flowing through the tolls, they go into the Consolidated Fund of India. This is what you have to understand. Public Accounts Committee, one of the oldest committees, right? The committee is one of the oldest of the parliamentary committees in India from its inception in the year 1921. Till the year 1950, the finance member was appointed as a chairman of the committee and its secretariat functions were looked on by the finance department, right? Next thing which you have to understand is it consists of 22 members, 15 elected by the Lok Sabha and the rest 7 are elected from the Rajya Sabha, and which is a method which is followed. We follow the proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. This is what you have to understand. The chairperson is appointed by the speaker from amongst its members of the Lok Sabha. The speaker for the first time appointed member of opposition as a chairman in 1967-68. This practice has been in continuing since then. Is it written somewhere? No, it is a convention, which is what you have to understand. What are the functions? See, again, we have the CAG coming up with various reports, and the Public Accounts Committee basically reads that report and comes with different recommendations, right? So the CAG acts as a friend, philosopher and guide with respect to the PAC. The committee, it is a duty of the committee to satisfy itself that the money shown in the accounts has been disbursed, were legally available for and applicable to the services or purposes to which they have been applied or charged, that the expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it, that every reappropriation has been made in accordance with the provisions made in this behalf under the rules framed by the competent authority. So primarily it's an aspect of financial audit. It looks into the different aspects. The audit is done by the CAG, but it looks into the various technicalities of the reports which are submitted by the CAG on the floor of the house. So the PAC basically goes through the reports, reads it and come up with the recommendations. That's what you have to understand. And here the CAG plays as a very important role of friend, philosopher and guide to the committee, Public Accounts Committee. Do have a reading, because this particular snippet has been directly sourced from the website of the CAG. So please do have a reading of this. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is a particular information given by the Union Minister of State for Ministry of Fishing, Animal Husbandry and Dairying. So he has given information with respect to the milk production in the country. Uttar Pradesh, the largest milk producer in the country, followed by Rajasthan, can be important for the prelims. Union Minister has given the information in the Lok Sabha. The country's total milk production in 23-24 was that of 239.3 million tons. 53% was from the cows, while buffalo's share was that of 43.6. We have also the other infographics. We have the infographics which have been given through the economic survey. The agriculture and allied activities contributes approximately to 16% of the economy. 3.5% growth has been observed, 5% annual average growth. Agriculture income grew by 5.23% annually over the past decades. This information can be used in your mains answer, right? And also look at this. Priorities for the agriculture sector. Tapping into the allied sectors such as the animal husbandry, which we just looked into. Dairying and fisheries can help farmers create additional income streams and act as buffers during the times of volatility. Promoting production patterns and practices that are aligned with specific agro-climatic conditions. Planting those crops which are in line with that particular ecological condition, right? Agroecological zonation. And natural resource availabilities of different regions, investments in research and development for precision agriculture, climate resistance varieties, improved agriculture practices, widespread adoption of digital technologies. And then we have effectively utilizing the ENAM, right? So that the farmers get the best price for their products. Focusing upon the FPOs, farmers producing organizations, so that their bargaining power increases, and enabling cooperatives to play a more influential role. You can also just look at this particular food grain production with respect to different years. So it has been continuously increasing. That is what you have to understand. So that's it from my side. I hope this session was really helpful for you. All the very best. Thank you so much.